Tonight, let me take you back to a time when simply staying alive felt like a miracle. A narrow strip of land by the sea, barely a name on the map. To the rest of the world, it was nothing more than a rumor, a faraway place of swamps, storms, and serpents. Then one day, strangers appeared. They didn't come crashing in like a wave. No, they arrived slowly, like rainwater soaking quietly into a thatched roof long after the storm had passed. And you, just an ordinary soul, maybe the son of a poor school teacher or someone who ferries people across rivers for a living. You didn't think you mattered much, but somehow your ears picked up more stories than most. So tonight, before you drift into sleep, turn down the lights. Let the fan hum gently in the background. Loosen your shoulders. Let your thoughts wander. And if something about this moment makes you feel a little quieter inside, tell me where you're listening from. What time is it where you are? Our story begins at the end of the 18th century, on a quiet night in a place with no electric lights. Only the deep, echoing sound of drums from the southern gate of Gia Distrocletawan ECBNH. But these weren't drums for celebration. They were warnings. The whispers said, NGUY letter 1EC5 Arn, the last surviving prince after the Tay Son storms, was coming back. And this time he wasn't alone. Siamese soldiers marched beside him, but more unsettling were the pale-skinned, blue-eyed men at the rear. Among them was a tall, thin man in black robes, a silver cross glinting at his chest, strange, foreign, sacred. His name, Pigno de Behane, but the villagers just called him Father Bardar El Letawani D9C. Behind him walked a bright-eyed boy with smooth hair, young Prince C letter 1E3NH, son of NGUY letter 1EC5 N Arn. He'd been sent to France to learn their language, their faith, their manners. Your child, probably still learning to row a boat or weave a fishing net. You stood quietly with your mother that day at the riverside as small boats pulled in. And from those boats stepped what many called saviors. It started small, a few guns, a few barrels of powder, some soldiers, and a sheet of paper, a secret treaty, Versailles, written in a language only the priest and the French prince could read. No one knew exactly what it said, but soon after, Gia Distrocletawan ECBNH was reclaimed. NGUY letter 1EC5 N Arn rose again. You remember it, the Tay Son heads hung on the city gates. But you also saw those foreign men strolling through the markets, smelling the straw, touching the bamboo, eyeing the dried fish. They didn't act like conquerors. One time you slipped and fell in a muddy field. A French soldier picked you up. He didn't speak your tongue, just placed a soft, buttery candy in your hand. You tasted it, and for the first time you understood. Not every invasion comes with a sword. Some arrive wrapped in sugar, sealed with a smile. From that moment on, Gia Distrocletawan ECBNH began to change. Tiny striped flags fluttered from rooftops. Whale oil lamps replaced the smoky ones. At the victory feast, they poured red wine. Just the scent of it made your father dizzy. You saw Father Bardar El Letawani ED9C seated at the same table as NGUY letter 1EC5 Narn. The man wasn't king yet, but people looked at him as if he already were. You watched, confused, because when you looked into those foreign men's eyes, you didn't see celebration. You saw pride. The kind of pride someone wears when they've bought land without even bargaining. Then came the ships. Bigger, blacker, reeking of salt, metal, and fresh paint. People whispered that they carried books, but not the kind your village teacher used. These were thick volumes marked with a faded cross, filled with squiggles that looked like crawling worms. And following those books were men in long, dark robes, quiet and slow, eyes deep like old wells. No swords, no shouting. Just a stillness that made your skin tingle. One day, a foreign priest showed up at the market. He bought fish, spoke broken Vietnamese. The kids laughed, but he didn't mind. He came back. This time with a village boy in tow, who now studied Latin, wrote stories about a Western god, and beamed when he talked of heaven. His mother, since converting, she'd been given rice, salt, and a pristine white candle. On Sundays, while you fished or planted rice, others began attending Mass. They called it baptism, but not like washing sins at a pagoda. No, they poured water on your head, gave you names like Jean, Pierre, Maria, names with no roots in your ancestors' soil. Your village began to split in two. One side with the faith, neat, educated, supported. The other side skeptical, guarded, muttering about foreign devils. And you, still watching from the middle, you noticed. Those men in black, even when carrying books, never came empty-handed. One misty January morning, the rooster's call echoed faintly through the fog. Out at sea, you spotted a dark shape, not a rice boat, not a merchant ship. A massive vessel of black iron, spewing smoke from its chimney like an angry beast. A steamship. You'd never seen anything like it. The men who stepped off wore white, carried no weapons, just thick ledgers. They didn't bargain, didn't trade. They stood still on the deck, as if drawing maps with their eyes. At first, you thought they were merchants, but they asked for land to build rest stops, chapels, always with a translator beside them, always speaking in lullabies. You felt a chill, because your grandfather once warned, those who whisper often wait until you're asleep to tie your feet. And in just a few years, churches began to rise. Simple, no golden dragons, but always full. That boy you once climbed trees with, now a preacher, he stopped swearing, stopped praying to ancestors, stopped burning incense. You asked, no more offerings. He just smiled. Everyone has their own ancestors. Your village split again. One side with gods and ghosts, the other with foreign prayers. And you still caught in between, still remembering. Because these visitors, they didn't come swinging blades. But they never walked in empty-handed, either. One morning, a strange rumor drifted down the river. The French have landed in Gia, Distro-Cletawan-ECBNH. This time you saw it with your own eyes. Day 1, cannon fire echoed from afar. Day 2. Smoke rose from the district governor's mansion. Day 3, gunshots cracked just behind your home. You and your mother dove into the earthen shelter beneath your house. The ground trembled, the roof groaned. When you climbed out, the market where you used to tease girls and buy bananas was nothing but scorched bricks and ash. Gia Distro-Cletawan-ECBNH had fallen. It happened so fast, no one even had time to scream. You saw French soldiers hoist their white and red flag over the citadel wall. It was bright, clean, Well made. You bit your lip, bitterly thinking, they must have brought an entire textile mill with them. People fled to the forests. But the French followed, not with fire or bullets, but with bags of rice, medicine, and clinics. They didn't conquer with violence. They conquered with generosity. And you saw it, how they only had to make an example of one rebel before the whole village pointed out the next. You weren't afraid of the soldiers. You were afraid of what people were turning into. One night, you passed by the riverside and saw French soldiers unloading crates. One fell open. Inside, papers, books, maps stamped with red wax. You picked one up. You couldn't read the words, but you recognized the signatures. One Vietnamese, one French. And suddenly you understood they weren't invaders. They had been invited. A boy ran past, holding a baguette. Delicious. The French gave it to me, he shouted. You watched him disappear down the alley as the fortress behind him glowed in the dark, not with your own lights, but with theirs. The next morning, you were tasked with counting households near Gia Distrocletawanecbnh, a bureaucratic name, but the real mission was to see how many would stay under French rule. You walked past familiar homes, now deserted, straw roofs sagging, white cloth hanging on doorways like mourning flags. An old man sat on his porch, smoking in silence. He muttered, "They fired one round, and we lost our homeland, and didn't even know it." You wrote his name down, but his eyes seemed to ask you, "You can write my name, but who'll protect my land?" In town, the French were putting up street signs. The old Hankow road now had a shiny white board. Rue des Missionnaires. The wood was polished, the lettering crisp. A young man from your village helped mount it, 3 coins per sign. He grinned, "A sign is a sign. As long as it feeds my family." You said nothing. The ones who'd spoken out were either gone or being watched. At a tea stall, an old scholar sighed. "We used to have kings and invaders. Now we just have invaders, and we call them friends." You didn't argue. You had no words left. The French claimed 3 provinces in the east. The king signed a treaty, Enham Tu Letawanie 5T. It sounded like something out of an old textbook, but the ink was real, the seal was real, and the land was lost. Word spread from HU Letawanie BF. After Gia Distrocletawanecbnh, the court surrendered the western provinces too. They called it strategic cooperation. You wanted to scream. Was it strategy or cowardice? The French built brick houses, set up telegram lines, opened schools to teach their language. Children chased after soldiers for candy. Women worked in their kitchens, the wages enough to feed entire families. A plantation owner requested more land. That land became a French commercial zone. He renamed it Happy Garden. You passed by. The workers' backs were bent, sweat soaking their shirts. You asked, "What's so happy about this?" One replied, "Better this than starving at home." You realized something chilling. France didn't need to force its ideals on anyone. They just had to make your people believe there was no better option. Then came whispers of resistance. Rebels in Tan Hoa beheaded a French officer, then fled to the jungle. They were caught weeks later, executed in public. You were in the crowd. Blood dripped down the execution table. A child asked, "Mama, is he a bad guy?" The mother looked away. You clutched your census notebook, the one with names of the displaced. So many pages still blank. Not because you hadn't written them yet, but because there was nothing left to write. You sat on the porch that night, rain just passed, the air still damp. Puddles shimmered in the moonlight like quiet mirrors, but the reflection staring back didn't feel like you anymore. Something about the land itself felt unfamiliar. Your niece, your younger sister's daughter, was now in her first year at a French Catholic school. She wrote Latin letters like wind, spoke bonjour and merci, and giggled G sways fatigere when she was tired. You asked her, "Do they teach you Chinese characters?" She scrunched her nose. "That stuff's hard, uncle. Our teacher says learning French makes it easier to become an official." You said nothing. Your grandfather once wrote calligraphy that danced like dragons on spring couplets. They'd hang them on red paper for New Year's. Now, no one did that anymore. This year, no one hung any couplets at all. Instead, people printed holiday cards, thick fonts, snowflakes, pine trees. You stood there, a chill settling in your chest, colder than the concrete floors. The kids didn't even play the same games. You used to jump rope, spin tops, play tag with pebbles and chalk. Now they flipped coins, marched in formation like little French soldiers. You asked your niece, "Want to play cat's cradle?" She gave you a look, the kind you'd give a ghost from another world. "That game's so old, uncle." You gave her a soft smile, not because the game was gone, but because what it once meant, that simple thread connecting two kids, had been replaced by a foreign command in a foreign tongue. You once thought, "It's just a game, who cares?" But now you knew. Each game holds memory, and when no one plays it anymore, that memory becomes abandoned land. Names started to fade too. No more Cuck, Mai, Hoa, or Distrocletawanisi BNH. Now the village list read Madeline, Louis, Jean, Claire. You said them aloud and felt like you were reading the census of a town in France. Christmas, once a distant myth, became a village festival. They lit candles, handed out gifts, even raised a pine tree in the old temple square. People said, "It's fun for the kids." You didn't argue, but deep inside you wondered, if one day this temple becomes a church, will anyone remember what these pillars and roof tiles once stood for? You visited a literacy class once. The teacher held up a chalkboard. "Chinese characters are hard. French is easier. Changing scripts helps modernize the people." Everyone clapped, except you. You didn't hate French. You were just sad that the old words hadn't even had time to say goodbye. On full moon days, you'd walk to the old temple. The Buddha statue was covered in dust. A monk leaned against a pillar, sighing. Now, people go to Jesus more than Buddha. He's got scholarships, bread, and shiny buildings. We only have incense and silence. You knelt down not out of faith, but out of memory. That old wall still carried your father's shadow, and his father's. Now it only carried the buzz of electric lamps. You remembered watching theatre here, Heart B letter 1 D9 I Chio. Now the stage was empty. Instead, A travelling European circus set up shop in the market, pulling massive crowds. The village girls once wore long hair and palm hats. Now they wore French curls, flared skirts, and clutched books in a language you barely knew. You didn't judge them, but you remembered. There was a time beauty didn't need translation. One evening you drank rice wine with your old teacher. He murmured, names, letters, roads, even games all changed. Only sadness hasn't been renamed. You were quiet, he told you. Back then, kids fell asleep to stories of th letter 1 san. Now, they ask for tailies of Santa Claus. You asked, what does he ride to deliver presents? The old man chuckled, reindeer, not buffalo. Not horses, not elephants. You paused. Back then, every animal had a meaning, a place, a story. Now, even the animals were imported. The French began teaching geography, but it was their geography. Maps redrawn with new names. Rivers and mountains sounded foreign, reshaped by their tongue. Your homeland no longer curled like the letter S in your imagination. Now it was just a scatter of lines and boxes on crisp white sheets printed in Paris. You remembered your grandfather's words. Our writing is the shape of our soul. And you whispered to yourself, so now, what language is our soul even written in? You walked down to the riverbank. Fireflies were gone. The bamboo groves were gone. In their place, red tile roofs, brick walls, and soft French laughter behind closed doors. They didn't conquer you with rifles. They rewrote you. Your language, your customs, your memories. This wasn't war. It was forgetting. You held an old piece of paper in your hand, your birth certificate, written in faded ch letter 1ef nom. Someone told you. Turn it in. Get a new one. The new ones are clearer, more official. You shook your head. Because throwing that paper away wouldn't just be discarding a document. It would be erasing a part of yourself. You returned to your childhood home. The thatched roof was now red tile. The old wooden gate had become a white iron fence. Inside, your niece was listening to Western music, upbeat, modern, fast. You asked, do you know any of our folk songs? She giggled. Those are so sad, Grandpa. You nodded, not because you disagreed, but because she wasn't wrong. Our songs, our stories, our games, they'd all slowed down. Too slow for this new world. You stepped into the yard where there used to be banana trees, clay water jars, and a fraying hammock. Now there were iron chairs, cement tables, everything neat, efficient. But cold. You realized then the French didn't need to steal your heart. They just needed you to forget where you left it. You remembered once hearing a French priest say during a Sunday mass, you don't need battles to conquer a nation. You only need to make them forget who they used to be. You used to think invasion meant blood, guns, and flags. Now you knew the deepest conquest is when your name, your dreams, your memories don't even belong to you anymore. You looked up at the sky. No fireworks, no planes. Just slow-moving clouds, as if searching for something old, something lost to the wind. And for the first time, you didn't feel angry, because even sadness is something you have to relearn. You simply stood there, silent, and remembered. Not out of hate, but to remind yourself Some countries aren't lost with gunfire. They're stolen quietly. With sweet candy, soft words, and lessons dressed as gifts, you closed your eyes. Listened to the soft rustle of the wind through new roof tiles. Sleep crept in slow, quiet, dreamless. But one question echoed in your heart. When exactly did we lose our country? You found yourself standing in the village market. But the laughter was gone. Buyers wore old clothes. Sellers offered meager handfuls of rice, a few roots, yet no one spoke, not because of hunger, but because no one believed tomorrow's meal would be any different than today's. An old woman wiping sweat with her scarf let out a soft sigh. We're living like we're waiting for someone else to decide what happens next. You asked gently, waiting for what? She didn't answer, just looked toward the sky where the French flag fluttered over the district barracks, not as a symbol of invasion, but now somehow a sign of government. Back in the capital, whispers stirred. A new treaty had been signed. No war, no negotiation, just silence and a signature. A former soldier passing through told you. The royal court sent a letter first, asked the French not to attack, then offered to co-rule to avoid bloodshed. You felt a chill creep down your spine. Not because of the letter, but because that way of thinking had become normal. An old acquaintance, once a low-level official, now worked as a translator for the French. He poured you a drink, chuckling, "Come on, just accept it. Protection is the new trend. France isn't ruling us, they're guiding us forward." You stayed quiet, because if you argued, you'd lose a friend. But if you said nothing, you'd lose yourself. Everywhere you went, voices had changed. Half Vietnamese, half French. Thua Ong became Oui Monsieur. Vang Letta One Ie One became Decord. It felt like living in a dream, where everyone wore masks and spoke with borrowed mouths. Children saluted like soldiers. You asked what they were playing. Pretending to be French officers, they cheered. You smiled, but it was crooked. As a child, you played the king or the hero fighting invaders. Now, heroism was a joke, and being the servant was the aspiration. One old scholar still tried to teach Chinese characters. The classroom was nearly empty. His hand trembled as he wrote on the board. He said softly, "Words help us remember the country. If we forget our words, the heart forgets too." You couldn't meet his eyes, because you were already considering sending your own child to a French school. Back in your village, people gathered quietly, not to talk of rebellion, but to sign letters. Petitions. Not out of love for France, but out of fear that the court could no longer protect them. An elder sipping tea muttered, "If our own king can't shield us, then let someone else guard the fields." You felt a sharp pain in your chest. Not because he was wrong, but because so many people were thinking the same thing. And no one dared say it out loud. News of the latest treaty spread faster than chimney smoke. It handed over what was left of the land in exchange for peace. And while the court still held ceremonies, issued edicts, nobody believed them anymore. You saw new royal documents printed in Vietnamese and French. the royal seal still pressed in red, but underneath, in fine print, avec l'approbation du gouverneur général. With the approval of the French governor. You looked up. You weren't angry anymore. You didn't even hope anymore. You just realized you had drifted from dreams of independence to the habit of asking permission. You asked a soldier at the market gate, "Do you still believe in the king?" He answered without turning his head, "I believe in feeding my family. I believe in rice on the table. The king, where was he when I lost my land?" You didn't blame him, because truthfully, you didn't know what you believed in anymore either. One day you passed the old church by the forest. People had built an ancestor altar next to the Virgin Mary. You asked why. The homeowner shrugged. "I'll pray to anyone, as long as they keep my house safe." Saint, ancestor, what's the difference? They're all up there. I'm just trying to survive down here. You left feeling hollow, not angry, not hopeful, just resigned. A people who once stood tall to fight invaders, now quietly waiting for a protector. Not out of cowardice, but because decades of disappointment had drained them dry. One rainy evening, you wandered near the forest's edge. You spotted a flickering oil lamp in the dark, too far from the village, too late at night. You crept closer, heart pounding. Through the trees you saw them, a small group huddled around dying embers. No uniforms, no flags, just weathered hands and steady eyes. Their leader stood tall, voice calm. "We're almost at the rendezvous point. By morning we split, north, central, south." Someone whispered, "Are you sure people still remember us?" The leader smiled. "They don't have to welcome us. They just have to not forget." Your breath caught. That one sentence, gentle but firm, lit something inside you, like a tiny flame in a paper lantern, delicate yet burning. You walked home in silence, didn't sleep. That night you opened your father's old chest. Inside, his hand-copied history book, the chronicles of D-stroke letter 1EA1, IV, I letter 1EC7T. Covered in dust, you wiped each page clean. The paper was yellowed, the script uneven. But the words still breathed. You lit a candle. Its small flame flickered across your reflection in the mirror. No longer a bystander, but someone who remembers. A few days later, the village buzzed with whispers. Someone had burned down a French military supply depot in the next town. A note was found on the market gate. "You can't steal what we still remember." Others spoke of old scholars teaching Chinese characters again, deep in the forest. No one knew their names. No one claimed the credit. They just called them Engir Quan, the Patriots, and something curious happened. Children who once practiced saluting like French soldiers were now stitching red fabric. A white star in the middle, not perfect, but glowing. The old woman who sold tea at the corner, she reached into her blouse one morning and pulled out a handkerchief, stitched on it. T letter 1ED5, QU letter 1ED1C, homeland. The village still didn't laugh like it used to, but in their eyes, a flicker had returned. One rainy night, you heard a soft knock on your wall, barely a sound. You opened the door. No one, just a small bundle on the steps, a dagger wrapped in a torn cloth. A worn book printed in QU letter 1ED1C NG letter 1EF, T letter 1EF1, L letter 1EF1C Van Dohan. And a tiny note. If you still remember, it's your turn. You clenched the bundle in your hands. No one asked you to fight. No one told you what to do. But you knew, if someone out there dared to light a flame, you couldn't be the one to blow it out. The next morning you woke before dawn. Mist hung low on the fields. You passed the old village temple, once a place of worship, then abandoned. Its doors were ajar. Inside, just a few figures, reading, lighting incense. No banners. No speeches. Just the silent continuation of something ancient. You lay down that night on your old bamboo bed. The crickets sang softly beyond the fence. Raindrops fell from the edge of the roof, steady, like the heartbeat of an old soul. You closed your eyes. In the quiet, one phrase returned to you, as long as someone remembers. It wasn't a call to arms. It wasn't a war cry, just a whisper. But one no heart could ignore. You didn't know what tomorrow would bring. Who would rise, who might fall. But you knew one thing, for the first time in years. You wanted to tell this story, not to be a hero, but so that when your grandchild looks up one day and asks, "Grandpa, who took our country from us," you'll have something to say.